Hello everyone, my name is Adam, and welcome into this week's trip down the Homeward Path. Before we get into things, I've got a few questions. Are you a fan of Magic the Gathering? Presumably so, since you're here listening to a podcast about it, but, what do I know? But is there something else in your life that takes precedence? Keeps you away from your magical aspirations? A job, a career, partner, spouse, children, any and all of the above. Listen, I'm right there with you. I have a wonderful wife, 3 children, full-time job, and a lot of extracurricular commitments that make it really difficult to devote the amount of time, finance, and energy that high-level competitive Magic normally takes. But in spite of that, are you, like me, relentlessly seeking improvement every time you get a chance to play? If that sounds like something you're interested in, then I suggest you hop in and buckle up. Now let's go for a ride. But it's a good time to remind you that we are brought to you by the following sponsors. PureMTGO.com is one of the largest depositories of Magic content on the web. They've got a little bit of something for absolutely everyone. And I do mean everyone. So head over there, check out their collection of stuff. While you're at it, I understand that the arena grind can feel like a bit of a slog, especially if, like me, you're traditionally at least a free-to-play player. But thanks to our sponsor at Grey Viking Games, you don't have to wander the wilderness in search of your glory on your own. You can head over there and find access to pre-release codes, single pack codes, cosmetics, promo packs, card sleeves, any and all of the above. So go and find your glory at GreyVikingGames.com. And if you want to support this show in a much more direct fashion, don't forget to head over to patreon.com/HomewardPathMTG. This show is always going to be free, but if you like what we're doing enough to help us keep doing it, go over, become a patron, and take advantage of your rewards. And if you've got questions, comments, or concerns about the show, or you just want to talk, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at HomewardPathMTG. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Adam Spain, like the country. Yes, I got picked on about that for most of my life. And you can join the conversation in the Facebook group, the Homeward Pathfinders. So, head over, check all that stuff out while you continue to listen on the Homeward Path. So I hope everybody's had a good week. We are going to dive right in to our Budget Spotlight. Budget Spotlight's a segment each week where we cover a collection of cards that I feel are worth more in gameplay than their price tag would suggest. And the first one on the list this week, because it is Sultai week, the theme of the episode is to do with the Sultai. I figured it would be a very fitting place to start to talk about their con. Tasigur, the Golden Fang. For those of you who don't know what Tasigur is 5 and a black, buys you a 4/5 legendary creature. Doesn't really matter the creature type except that it's human, so you can't mutate onto him. Tasigur says delve, so for every card you exile from your graveyard as you cast this spell, it reduces its cost by 1, generic. And for 2 and then 2 hybrid symbols of either green or blue, you can mill your top 2 cards and then an opponent chooses a non-land card in your graveyard to put back in your hand. So it's usually a tag partner for Gurmag Angler, but Tasigur can help fuel all your powerful delve cards, which in turn help make Tasigur's other ability much more powerful. Notably, you know, if you're using delve cards or you're using cards that let you eat your graveyard for value, that means you can craft a situation where Tassiger's ability is only possibly going to return one or two cards from your graveyard that are just obscenely powerful. And it can be absolutely nutty in Commander. It's obviously good in 60 card formats. It has sort of a busted in half pedigree in 60 card formats. But it's even nuttier in Commander, where it always goes to the command zone, and Delve pays for Commander tax. So you can just keep buying it back. You can eventually mill your library, keep using your other Delve cards to eat your graveyard, and then eventually put your opponent in a situation where they have to give you back the Thassa's Oracle in your graveyard, where they have to give you back the Laboratory Maniac, or they have to give you back the Jace Wielder of Mysteries. They have to give you back your win condition for having an empty library. And I think that's really sweet. And especially considering this card, for all of that utility, is 50 cents. Come on. Are you kidding me? I know I sound a little bit like Jim Morrow when I say that. Budget? I'm not talking about budget. I'm just trying to win a game. But Tassiger at 50 cents is kind of obnoxious, right? It's a card you feel comfortable playing 2 to 3 of in 60 card formats where you want to play it, and it's obviously a one of in your Commander decks, but it's just really stinking good. Next on the list is a card that I feel like if I haven't covered on this show already, I'm doing my job wrong, and if I have covered it on the show already, we just need to talk about it again. And that card is Treasure Cruise. Treasure Cruise being 7 in a blue, and it has Delve, so for every card you exile from your graveyard as you cast the spell, it reduces its cost by 1 generic. And 3 of the simplest words you can possibly imagine that have just all the power in the world. Draw 3 cards. Draw 3 cards. As little as 1 mana. Seriously though, who thought this card was okay? Especially when it first premiered into a standard format with fetch lands. What? How, in what universe is that card okay? Apparently the correct answer to that question is a universe without fetch lands, because it's been good, not great in Pioneer. But being more quote-unquote balanced in Pioneer or Commander, obviously it's banned in Modern, Legacy, Pauper because it's busted in half. But even being more balanced in Commander and Pioneer, it's Ancestral Recall. It's not Ancestral Recall from turns 1 through, let's say, turn 5, probably. Unless you're all the way in on Treasure Cruise. But it is not a big leap from this card to go from being into the story, or not into the story, I guess it would have to be, I don't know, compulsive research that doesn't make you discard, to an Ancestral Recall. That's really good. And oh, by the way, it is 35 cents for Ancestral Recall. What? How? The hyperbole, the superlative exclamations of questions don't do this card justice. It's just obnoxious. And I know it's a common, obviously, or it wouldn't have had to be banned in Pauper. It just never would have been legal in the first place. But even as a common, a card with this power level and this pedigree definitely deserves to have a higher price tag, even if it's been reprinted. It's so good. Now moving on, we have the most expensive card on today's list, and that card is Wilderness Reclamation. It is 3 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. Now, cat out of the bag, this card is banned in Historic and Pioneer, and it was banned from Standard before it rotated, even though it was only going to be like a month and a half before it rotated. But it still gets things done in Modern or Commander. I have lost games to this card in Modern, playing Pyromancer, playing Prowess, playing Phoenix. I have lost games to Wilderness Reclamation, into Nexus of Fate, into second Reclamation, Expansion Explosion kills you. It's not outside the realm of possibility, and don't pretend like it is. It's particularly obnoxious, though, when you start looking at formats like EDH. It's particularly obnoxious alongside utility lands. Lands like Castle Vantress, lands like Search for Azcanta, lands like Arch of Orazca, lands like Maze of Ith. I guess less Maze of Ith. Lands like Castle Lochthwain, lands like the creature lands, because it allows you to use them on your turn and then untap and get to use them again. Even something as innocuous as a Crawling Barrens, being able to sink your mana into it on your turn, untap at the end of the turn, and be able to leave up your interaction, and then when it goes around the table and they don't do anything you have to worry about, you can just sink a bunch more mana into Crawling Barrens and threaten to kill somebody. To say nothing of the prospect of hitting it with a Mythos of Aluna, making more copies of it, and continuing to go bananas. And this thing is $2.50. That's the most expensive card we're going to talk about in Budget Spotlight today. I have to preface that before we move on. You can do a lot worse than $2.50 for a mana doubler. I heard mana doublers are pretty good. And last but not least, we have a card that is taking Standard and Historic by storm, but still has a lot of room to be just absolutely obnoxious when it comes to Commander. And that card is Emergent Ultimatum. Emergent Ultimatum is black, green, blue. Sorcery. Search your library for up to three non-land cards with different names and exile them. Your opponent chooses one of them to go back into your library. Cast the other two without paying their mana costs, and then exile Emergent Ultimatum. So, getting 2 spells for 7 mana is not like groundbreaking stuff, right? We've had cards like Diluvian Primordial in the format. We've had cards like Torrential Gearhulk in the format. We've had cards like what's the one's coming to mind? The Sphinx of the Scholar from Historic. You know, we've had cards in the format that allow us to cast multiple spells for 7 mana. You know, we've had Finale of Promise in the format that can do it for less mana. We've had Fires of Invention in the format, and that's the closest parallel I can draw to just how busted in half this card is. Because you don't just get 2 spells for 7 mana, you get 2 specific spells out of your deck for 7 mana. And being able to set the opponent up for it is just absolutely filthy. Put them on the back foot, make them worried about pressure, and then you present like Vorinclex, Alrund's Epiphany, and Kioribes the Sea God. No matter what they choose, they're gonna die. Because if they choose the Vorinclex and the Kiora, you get to tap all their stuff down much faster. If they choose Alrund's Epiphany, Kioribes the Sea God, well, they die anyway, because you get both of them, you get an extra turn, you get the 2/1/1 birds, you get an 8/8. And then you get to untap, and you make it to where all their stuff attacks, and you get another attack phase in. And that's just the standard applications. I don't even want to think about the dumb stuff you can do with this thing in historic or pioneer or modern or EDH. It's just stupid. Oh, and by the way, it's the grand high price of $1. What? $1. A singular dollar. We're talking pauper prices for a card that allows you to just absolutely dominate what's left of a game. Come on. So that'll wrap it up for Budget Spotlight. And moving on to our second segment, Brew of the Week is where I try to spotlight either a concept that I'm working on or something that someone has submitted for the show that I want to talk about, or that they wanted me to talk about, depending on the situation. And in this case, I'm taking a look at Pauper for the first time in a very long time to talk about a deck concept. It is very much still in the concept stages. I have not gotten formal lists ironed out yet. But I'm calling the deck Sultai Xerox. The concept of the deck is we want to maximize our brainstorm and ponder mileage while finding inventive ways to mitigate mana flood. Which is what all these Xerox cantrip decks want to do, right? But 3 colors sounds really questionable when you want to do that. Enter the card that makes the deck tick, and that card is Land Grant. And I know what you're thinking, that card that you put in 1 land spy so you don't have to play lands. It's that card you play in Charbelcher in Legacy so you only have to play 2 lands. Yes. But it's also got some mileage here, thanks in large part to the snow duels from Kaldheim. Because you can play blue and black mana sources in your deck that Land Grant can go get. It can go get you a forest island, and it can go get you a forest swamp. But as with any Xerox concept, we want good ways to pay us off for going down this road, and that's where things get interesting. That's where the customization lies, is with any cantrip heavy deck. What are you doing to get paid off for playing all this air in your deck? Do you want to play a lot of good removal, or do you want to play tempo generating cards? Do you want counter spells like Mana Leak or actual counter spell or circular logic or something along those lines? Or do you want cards like Ghastly Demise? Do you want cards like what is the name of that thing? I'm drawing a blank. You've got a lot of stuff on the table that you can play, essentially, for your interactive suite. You can play some combination of removal, counter magic. You can even play fog effects. Cards like Moment's Peace, cards like Tangle. So that once you start to build a board presence, you can just allow your opponent to attack, stop it from mattering, and then attack back. Treat the tempo as trying to get extra combat phases, essentially. How do we want to use our graveyard? Nimble Mongoose, Werebear, the aforementioned Circular Logic, and Ghastly Demise make a case for Threshold, but Gurmag Angler and Hooting Mandrills also want to use the cards in your graveyard to, shall we say, much less Bajuka Boggable standards. As someone who's tried to play a Threshold deck in Pauper in the past and gotten blown out by Bajuka Bogs and Nihil Spell Bombs, I can definitely see the allure to just trying to get the advantage now. I don't disagree with that. So if that's your bag, you've still got plenty of blues. You've still got, black sources for Angler that you can fetch with Land Grant. You've got green sources. If you just play, we'll say 4 duels, right? You just play 2 each of the Kaldheim Snow Forest duels. If you just play 2 each of those, you've got 4 targets for your 4 land grants, and you've got access to all of those. So that means you've got easy access to green mana and easy access to your black mana for Angler. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Every land grant you resolve is one more mana you don't have to pay for Hooting Mandrills or Gurmag Angler. I think that's pretty cool. Do we want the Exhume plus Cycling Creatures package? And in fact, it can even get bigger because of the presence of actual green mana in the deck. A card like Greater Sandworm that maybe you wouldn't have played in the deck before because there was no way you could feasibly cast it. Maybe that thing has some legs now. Or probably not, because it's a worm, but... Do you want the Exhume plus Cycling Creatures package in order to cycle a creature on turn 1, land grant for an untapped forest on turn 2? You know, Exhume, get a body on the table, get a hit. Or do you want Delver in the deck? Because ostensibly you're going to be a better Delver deck than the other Delver decks at flipping your Delver because you just have more instants and sorceries in your deck because you got to cut lands to play Land Grant, which is a sorcery. And then when it comes to sideboard packages, we get Hydroblast, yes, I know, and I would love to be able to play Pyroblast as well, and honestly, this deck could probably go Temur too if that's something you want to do. Play Skred and all snow-covered basics as opposed to cards like Ghastly Demise, but I personally am in love with Angler and Ghastly Demise. But nobody ever said you had to do either or. You can also just do both. One of the other neat things about playing a deck with Land Grant in it is you also get to make your Augur of Bolas better. So if you want to adopt more of a reactive stance and just try to win the long game by grinding your opponent out and being able to hit your land drops in a deck that probably only plays like 14 or 15 lands, you can do that. Because of silly things like Augur of Bolas being able to find Land Grant, which can then go get you a land and shuffle the other two cards you put back through if you wanted to find them. It also makes it possible, thanks to Land Grant, to be able to splash a fourth color. For example, for something like Swirling Sandstorm. If you need a board wipe after sideboard, Swirling Sandstorm's got you covered. We'll just kill all the things, including their anglers. The one caveat I would say to that, I put in the notes, I said we could even splash a fourth color out of the board if your ambition outweighs your sensibilities. So that's all I got to say about Sultai Xerox. I think the deck has got some legs, or I mean, it can definitely trip you up. Yet it can trip, but I think it's got some worth it can prove. I mean, part of it is just my overwhelming desire to maximize Alan Comer theories. He was one of my favorite deck builders in the history of Magic, and playing a deck that gets to cheat as far down on lands as possible but still hit a land drop every turn is what we should all aspire to do, right? So I'm really intrigued by it. I'm definitely going to get to work on trying to hammer out a list. So moving on to main topic this week, I have the working title, as it were, Brooding. So who are the Sultai Brood? They are the clan of the Plane of Tarkir. The Sultai Wedge is primarily black, exploring how it interacts with its ally color blue and its enemy color green, just like the structure of the other cons that we've gone through so far. Abzan and Jeskai. In the lore, the Sultai are depicted as ambitious and merciless, fueled by their admiration for the dragon's aspect of ruthlessness. They are villains undone by their own greed in both timelines in the Tarkir storyline. Sultai are the bad guys. They're the bad ones. They're the ones you're not supposed to like. Because they're supposed to be, for lack of a better term, the mustache twirling villains. They're bad. They're bad people bad creatures who do bad things. They want what's best for no one but themselves. From a mechanical identity standpoint, their early timeline mechanic Delve goes down as one of the most broken mechanics of all time. Because, just like Affinity before it, when you give players the ability to use a resource that is very readily available to make their spells cost less, they're going to do everything in their power to make those spells cost as little as possible and be unreasonably powerful for their cost. That's just how it's going to work every time. The new timeline mechanic, Exploit, does a better job of depicting the ruthless nature of the clan. Exploit being, when this creature enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice another creature, and when you exploit a creature, you get to do a thing. Outside of Tarkir, when supported, Sultai tends to operate as a mid-range graveyard deck, or as some sort of completely and utterly degenerate deck. Think, I don't know, Dredge and Extended, before they banned Dread Return. It's kind of obnoxious, right? So what's the competitive history? My competitive history with Sultai. The first one I ever saw, and this kind of led me to believe that, at the time we called it bug, black, blue, green, that bug decks were limited to eternal formats, or at least formats that went further back than standard. One of the first decks I really got to lay eyes on that was built in these colors was, I call it Loam Tog. I can't remember for sure what they called it at the time. I can't remember if they called it Grow a Tog or if it was something else. I want to say Grow a Tog was a version that happened before extended rotation, when you could play the Miracle Grow stuff alongside Psychotog in the same deck. But this deck was, I said, it's what do you get when you cross a strong control archetype with a powerful grinding engine? Life from the Loam and Cycling Lands joined Psychotog to give the deck a reliable way to churn through cards and power up good old Dr. Teeth. For those of you who don't know the interaction, Life from the Loam is 1 and a green and returns 3 lands from your graveyard to your hand, and has Dredge 3. So whenever you would draw a card, you can instead mill your top 3 cards and return Life from the Loam from your graveyard to your hand. Well, then you would be able to cast Life from the Loam, buy back some cycling lands, cycle one of those lands for 1 mana, mill 3, get your Life from the Loam back, and have 2 extra cards in your hand. And in turn, lay flashback cards into your graveyard. And in particular, those work wonderfully alongside Psychotog, who can turn 1 card in your hand or 2 cards in your graveyard into +1/+1 till end of turn on your 3 mana 1/2. Good luck killing that thing with Lightning Bolt. It's not going to happen. It's just not. And then when you factor in stuff like Circular Logic or what have you, it gives you the ability to just annihilate someone out of nowhere. You get the Tog down, you get to untap with it, they're probably going to die. Next on the list is another extended deck, this one from 2007, and it was Countertop Goyf. And I could swear that this deck had a much cuter name at the time. I really don't remember. I tried to find it, and all I could find was they called it Countertop Goyf. It was popularized by winning Pro Tour Valencia in 2007 in the hands of Remy Fortier. And what this deck did is it combined the best threats, Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant, with the most powerful interactive package to create a robust mid-range control deck capable of grinding against anybody. When you have Counterbalance and Sensei's Divining Top, there's this sort of unspoken advantage that you get to enjoy because you don't have to play a bunch of counter spells in your deck. It also makes your playing Sensei's Divining Top makes your Dark Confidants better, because the Dark Confidant reveal always hits a cheap card, and you can fit some expensive cards in your deck without annihilating your own life total. To the point that this deck was playing cards like Venser, Shaper, Solvent, Threads of Disloyalty, just a litany of some of the more interesting interactive options available. It was very clearly built to beat zoo-style aggro decks and to be able to have game against the other mid-range decks and combo decks. And then I really didn't get to see another good Sultai deck for a long time. It just didn't show up. It was not a color combination that was supported in Standard, and it was not a color combination that I ever really got a chance to play before I took my long hiatus from 2011 to 2016. And then everything changed. With the advent of Sultai Marvel. Now, bear in mind, this was at the time period where the energy cards were not just the best things to be doing in Standard, but they felt absolutely, completely and utterly broken compared to the rest of Standard. Like, it was this free resource that you got for, like, no effort, while everybody else was, like, jumping through hoops to try to make their cards good. And the Sultai version in particular was an interesting spin on the archetype. It's funny because I said spin on the archetype, and we're talking about Aetherworks Marvel, which is like spinning a wheel to see if your opponent dies out of nowhere. But I digress. This deck became, I'm not going to say popular, but at least, existent after the banning of Felidar Guardian took the 4th color out of the Saheeli mid-range energy deck. And as such, players just gravitated to the next broken thing, which was Marvel, which allowed you to cast your 10 mana Ulamog on turn 4. Well, it turned out you didn't actually need the red cards to do that, because Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot didn't care if you played red cards in your deck. It didn't care. It was totally fine if you didn't want to do that. But what this deck did is it married the degenerate Aetherworks Marvel engine, a la Attune with Aether, Rogue Refiner, Marvel, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, Ulamog, to a sort of quasi-reanimator package in the form of, you were already interested in playing Vessel of Nascency to look for your Marvel, or hit land drops to be able to cast your Marvel, or find Puzzle Knot if you already had Marvel, and it would take you from turn 4 to turn 5, but you could still get there. But in addition to that, you were also playing Liliana Death's Majesty, so that when your opponent countered Ulamog on turn 4 or turn 5, you could untap on the next turn and slam Liliana down and just revive your Ulamog. Just be like, hey, you know that thing you didn't like? Well, here it is again. It also added the creature Demon of Dark Schemes as both another Marvel hit that was powerful, because it would sweep the boards of most of the red aggro decks, and it's another thing to sink your energy into that would cheat a giant creature into play. Notably, when you did that with Demon of Dark Schemes, you would give everybody else -2/-2, get energy for each thing that died, and then be allowed to turn around and funnel that energy into the demon to buy back another creature from your graveyard. Like, it was really cool, right? But then, of course, they banned Aetherworks Marvel because that card was stupid, especially in a format that didn't have any ways to answer it. rather than ban the payoffs for the card, they just banned all the setup. A strategy that they didn't quite get right the first time around, because that gave life to the next deck on our list, Sultai Energy. Now, Tamer Energy took the headlines, but Sultai Energy won the World Championship that year. It married the Energy Midrange package of Longtusk Cub, Attune with Aether, Rogue Refiner. Instead of marrying it to Whirler Virtuoso, Glory Bringer, and Harness Lightning, it married it to Glint Sleeve Siphoner and the Scarab God. But on top of that, you also got to play Winding Constrictor, Rishkar Pima Renegade, and Verdurous Gearhulk. So that while you were stockpiling energy, you were also stockpiling power and toughness on the battlefield and stressing your opponent's energy reserves in the mirror match or in the quasi-mirror when they were playing Teamer. You would stress their energy reserves in that matchup because they'd have to spend more energy than they could make early in the game to harness lightning your creatures so they wouldn't get violenced to death. And it was an interesting deck because it was also a very kind of malleable archetype, because some builds were like the one that Seth Manfield won Worlds with. Yes, they were very proactive Winding Constrictor, Rishkar, Verdurous Gearhulk decks that happened to play Siphoner and Scarab God. Other builds were more sort of trying to take advantage of the easier mana, because Attune with Aether was such an important card, and you actually got to play 8 untapped green duels in Blooming Marsh and Botanical Sanctum, so it made your turn 1 Attunes easier to stomach. But it was the type of deck that, I mean, objectively speaking, was just very good, right? To the point that even players realized they didn't have to play the Winding Constrictor engine, and in cutting that, they actually just splashed the 4th color thanks to Aether Hub and additional like fast lands or basic lands to go get with Attune with Aether. And then they played, what is the card's name? I'm drawing a blank. They played Whirler Virtuoso and Harness Lightning inside their Sultai energy decks. As they lovingly referred to it at the time, it was Sultai Red. Where you got to marry your Terminate to your Siphoner so that you had even more and more effective one-for-one trade cards that would allow you to body your opponent through the middle of the game. And it was really, really cool. You could count me in the, you can count me much more favorable among the streamlined Teamer energy deck. But I wouldn't behoove you, I wouldn't beseech you to try to change your ways if that's not what you wanted to do. Next up, we have the deck that sort of, it didn't dominate Standard, but it's always been a player. Up until its key cards rotated last year, or in October, as it were. And that deck is Sulti Midrange from Ravnica Allegiance Standard through October, basically. And the initial builds featured Explore Creatures, Wildgrowth Walker, and Hydroid Krasis, Thought Erasure, and the like. Fair, balanced, powerful Magic. It's the deck that Nick played at Grand Prix Memphis 2018. It was a deck that we really enjoyed. But I'm not going to disparage anybody that didn't want to play it. It was a good deck. You got to just play a lot of really good Magic cards. And then the Explore Creatures plus Wildgrowth Walker did a really good job of making your aggro opponent's lives miserable long enough for you to come out and steal a game. War of the Spark kind of took that formula and turned it on its head. Because War of the Spark gave us Nissa, Who Shakes the World. And Nissa pushed Krasis firmly into unfair territory. Because now, instead of your Krasis needing a lot of lands in play to serve as a big mana sink and draw you a bunch of cards and gain you a bunch of life, now you could do it the turn after you untapped with Nissa, which put a lot of pressure on an opponent to remove the Nissa. Kind of a big deal. In addition, there cropped up a couple of different lists that wanted to play sort of one-card combos as curve toppers inside the archetype. Those two cards that kind of differentiated the deck, you either played the Bolas' Citadel version, wherein you would barf a bunch of Explore creatures and Wild Growth Walkers out of your deck in order to set up a Drain You for 10 after I attack sequence, or you would play Command the Dreadhorde to bring back a couple of Planeswalkers and a couple of big creatures in conjunction with like double Wild Growth Walker, Jade Light Ranger, and just keep your, you wanted the Command the Dreadhorde to put you at, 2, 3, 4 life, and then your triggers from Wild Growth Walker and Explore creatures to gain you right back up into double digits. And just put lots and lots of power and toughness and overall generic card power level on the table. And then the unthinkable happened, which was even after the rotation of the Explore creatures, this deck was still good. You cut the Explore creatures and you just played Uro and Growth Spiral and Nissa and Krasis and removal spells and Thought Erasure, and you still got to do all the same things. You just weren't interested in playing creatures early in the game, but you still just got to play a lot of really, really good Magic cards. So this deck continued its run of playability, of viability, all the way up until Uro got banned. That's how good this deck was. Nissa rotates, and you can still play Sultai Midrange? Come on. But in the middle of all of that, we had the deck that had the highest representation of any deck, or the archetype that had the best collection of power level and just really, really good Magic cards I think I've ever seen in a format. And that deck was the Sultai Food deck from Mythic Championship Eldraine. I'm calling it MC Eldraine because I can't remember where it was or what the official name was. It was dubbed by the pro players Pro Tour Oko. It was the absolute pinnacle of Oko madness because it contains one of the highest concentrations of banned cards and only lasted one event before Oko was banned. But it got to play all the things the Simic Food deck did. Oko, Krasis Nissa, Wicked Wolf, Trail of Crumbs. But then it also pitched in Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, Midnight Reaper. So on top of already having one of the best mid-range frameworks to work with, you just got to add this other thing that would annihilate your average aggro opponent. So, I mean, top to bottom, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, right? Cards that were banned in this deck: Oko, Thief of Crowns, Veil of Summer, Cauldron Familiar. There's just a lot about this deck that was not right. Now, moving on from one degenerate thing to the most recent degenerate thing that Sultai's been able to do, we have the sort of demon of current standard, and that is Sultai Yorion, wherein you are playing a flicker mid-range value deck that in secret is actually just trying to ramp into Emergent Ultimatum, Alrund's Epiphany, and some way of murdering you. So it's a reactively postured mid-range deck, which is a little bit of an unusual and unorthodox position for a Sultai deck to be in, but it just outvalues everybody, right? If you're trying to play a game of fair and balanced Magic with them, you are going to have a very bad time. And I mean a very bad time. Because Binding of the Old Gods, Omen of the Sea, Elspeth's Nightmare, I know there's more. Midnight Clock against the Rogues deck, like, it's got access to everything it needs to be able to fight through whatever your opponent's doing, and it can just win by doing that. But if you give them the opening, or if they're already ahead on the board and it doesn't matter if it gets countered, down comes Emergent Ultimatum and you better do something about it. Because it might just flip them Epiphany, Vorinclex, Balaged Recovery, right? Or Epiphany, Vorinclex, Elder Gargaroth. Like, what do you give them? What do you give them in that situation? There's not a good thing to do. Like, you can have the Gargaroth back and then I'll take 16 plus whatever you got on the table before I get to untap again. You can have the Gargaroth and the Epiphany. And then they make 2/1/1s, and then they make the Gargaroth, and then they get to attack for 8, make another 3/3 or draw a card, and you are super far behind on the board. Like, there's not a good place to be if you get into a good old-fashioned slugfest with this deck. They are going to drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. They are going to make sure you don't do anything particularly scary to them until they're ready to punish you for it. And nothing screams Sultai more than trying to punish you for doing what you do, right? We just talked about what villains they are in the lore. It's very fitting. So with that out of the way, that's all I've got for this week, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, the basis for Sultai is it's a grinder, but every once in a while they give them something that they just have no business getting. And even though it's a grindy deck and it feels like you can play because the games go long, you're not in that game. You were never in that game. It's the scene from Fast and the Furious. You never had me. You never even had my life total. So, I mean, Sultai is what you absolutely do not want to have to play against unprepared. Because it's either going to be some sort of a degenerate deck that just wrecks your face, or it's going to be this really long, ugly, grinding game where by the end of it you feel like you need a shower. Because so much weird, disgusting stuff just happened. And with that, I got to let you know. But you can find me on Twitter at HomewardPathMTG. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Adam Spain. You can join the conversation in our Facebook group, the Homeward Pathfinders. And if you, like me, have a particularly sort of twisted but clean sense of humor, you can send me your favorite Magic-related puns on Twitter with the hashtag MTGDadJokes. And we got, I think, 3 this week. I'm going to have to look for the other 2. The first is from Joey Schultz, said, adding ink shield to my black white. Oh, no, I did that one last week. Never mind. Did I do that one last week? I bet I did. I'm going to have to look for the rest of them. Where did it go? There we are. From Brad. White black now has inklings, but what about the rest? What about some of the rest? White blue gets blinklings. I mean, I get it. I dig it. Blinking Spirit was a card that I played once. I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud to admit that, but it is definitely a card I played once. Black-green gets stinklings. Blue-green gets thinklings. Blue-red gets slinglings. Oh, you were so close. It's flinglings, Brad. Flinglings. And black-red gets meanlings. And yes, they are. As somebody who has frequently dabbled in the red-black side of the color wheel, we're all meanlings. We have another one from courtesy. I jumped in to make the joke for Brad. He said, got in some impromptu spell table games of Pauper. It feels so good to have actual paper cards in my hand, and Brute Squad is a beast. And I responded with, you could perhaps say it was brutal. To which Brad responded at 2, Brute. Very proud of this community, let me tell you. And then, most recently, Titan Smash MTG said, I have one extra Strixhaven pre-release code. Whoever can post the best Magic-related pun in the comments gets it. And Brad tagged me, so I had to do it. I said, I've been enjoying the Vaderok plus HomewardPath combo, but the deck feels a little inconsistent sometimes. I guess you could say it's an unstable mutation. Yeah! No. Please don't sue me, The Who. You won't get any money. I don't have any. But that's all I've got for this week, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. You got questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below or contact me on any of the social media networks. And remember, everybody's going through stuff right now. So if you have to pick what kind of person you're going to be every morning, be kind. And with that, we'll catch you next week.